We're going to move into another session here with myself and with Brett Suma talking a little bit about industry connectivity and kind of why that is one of the whole points of this entire conference, right? And you're here representing Wabash today. But to start, we have to go back like 2.5 months to February, right? With the acquisition of Trailer Hawk from Wabash. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So if we went back to, I guess, the end of the year, we divested our freight brokerage. Mostly we divested in order to be able to come to market with Trailer Hawk and we're transacting two transactions at once. So divesting the freight brokerage and then also selling Trailer Hawk AI's technology stack along with our tech team to Wabash. And really that was intended to enable Wabash to take a physical asset and really connect it to the supply chain in a different way and have Wabash show up in a different way into the market. And then it's interesting that this conference kind of came right as Trailer Hawk 1.2 is about to be released into the market.
So when we're talking about Trailer Hawk now, you're using it with one of these large trailer manufacturers. It's kind of the perfect marriage when you think about it, right? And the trailers as a service model is something that isn't necessarily new to the industry anymore, but it's presented a really big opportunity to highlight the importance of having this interconnectivity and having something that provides constant eyes on your asset and on the assets within your asset, right? Talk to me a little bit about what's changed maybe in the last 3 to 6 months with the fraud ecosystem and why it's so important to find that connectivity between a platform like Trailer Hawk and a manufacturer.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing was that the marriage worked out perfectly because of the intended goals of Trailer Hawk and the intended goals of Wabash on their task platform. And really, when you looked at Trailer Hawk and what we can offer Wabash was the ability to have a tremendous amount of utility in the trailer, a tremendous amount of assurance built into the trailer, and then lastly, a component of visibility. And when you think about fraud and why those things are important in solving a fraud in our industry, it's more about how do you provision access of who is interacting with, if you're a carrier or a 3PL, how do you provision access on who can actually engage with your trailer? So there's an element to the universal coupler is like the huge enabler in our business, but it not only does it enable efficiency for trucking companies and carriers, but it also is an enabler for thieves as well. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to provision access to the actual usage of a trailer. And then how do you provision access to the actual cargo of the trailer? And if you're a shipper, what visibility are you really getting into your cargo as opposed to getting in visibility to the assigned driver that's supposed to be moving your cargo? So there's a big difference when you're talking about visibility of actual visibility to your cargo versus an ELD tracking integration. That was really like the marriage of what Wabash wanted to build with TAS and then what they can build with a Trailer Hawk technology stack top of that.
So we'll take this question from a shipper perspective and from the carrier perspective. From a shipper perspective, when you're looking at using a trailers of a service model, from looking at fraud, what are some of the biggest vulnerabilities that a shipper would see as a trailer as a service model? And then how does Trailer Hawk and the Wabash marriage kind of mitigate that?
Yeah, so I spent 20 years working in night transportation, and I'll tell you that sales at night very different than in the 3PL world, because at night transportation there's an amount of fidelity that the shipper has when it's a night tractor and a night trailer that show up to the dock, and the driver gets out and he has a night hat and a night t-shirt and a night ID card.
You trust him.
Yeah, there's an amount of assurance that exists there. And so when we were scaling our power only freight brokerage, we wanted to be able to provide that same amount of assurance to the shipper. So in terms of, doing a driver verification component. So in order to interact with our trailer, you have to have a verified driver. You have to be a validated carrier. There has to be an association between that driver and that carrier. And so that's when you talk about permissioning and access and those types of things. And then in addition, being able to give the shipper the ability to have command and control over the access to the cargo area, which does not exist currently in the market. And so now the shipper has the ability to give command and control. And in addition to that, also having a complete chain of custody for when, where, why, and how that the cargo was accessed. So what we're really trying to build in is the ability for 3PL to compete like an asset carrier, We believe that we're building the first trailering company. Okay. And so that's a different concept in terms of anything that exists, like building a trailering company with assurance products that exist that allow a 3PL to compete like an asset-based carrier, but then from the shipper perspective, giving you the ability to build visibility products that don't exist currently in terms of where your cargo is, not where the truck is, but where your actual cargo is, and then actually being able to provision access to that cargo.
So taking that from the carrier perspective, you mentioned fidelity and the trust that comes with a known name showing up in that night trailer, the night truck, the night hat, all of those things. And in this day and age, we don't necessarily have that a lot of times, right? And that's a point where you get a little bit of hesitation or some wariness when you're talking about building that trust. And it almost leads us to believe from a carrier perspective that using trailers as a service can be an asset for the carriers because if they're in the network, they're in that connected space, it adds a little bit of trust, even if their name isn't known. Talk to me just about how kind of wrapping together both of those thought processes makes for a smoother operation overall and then reduces some of the friction points that a shipper might have with maybe their 3PL.
Yeah, I mean, actively last week we had a 3PL that is a trailer as a service customer that we actively help resolve a stolen load for them as the trailering partner.
Mm.
And so when you think about the technologies that we've built in and the processes that we've built in and our ability to act as an asset provider or a capacity provider, in addition to the 3PL being the power provider, it just is an enablement, right? If you're thinking about the utility that we're able to offer as a trailering company, so we have a trailer that can go anywhere, that can be loaded in any lane, but then those assurance products that exist and those visibility products that exist, we become like an extension of the 3PL, but we also become an extension of the shipper. So we're completely agnostic to the freight transaction, but that enablement allows I think a greater level of competition, but a greater level of fidelity in terms of, Brett Suma from Brett Suma's Trucking is the person who arrived to pick up. The shipper is able to verify that. We've done the same diligence that a trucking company would have done on that individual. So those are the types of things that we're working on in terms of like scaling our business and just allowing everybody in the audience to have a more connected ecosystem.
Mhm.
And I think that from my perspective, there's one element when we talk about like what happens when you go from sensing the world around you to being connected to the world you're in. And really what we're building is we're building a trailer that is connected into the ecosystem and is platformed by shippers and platformed by 3PLs, much, much more than simply just a box on wheels and well beyond a box on wheels with a tractor.
So, when you guys look to the future of this partnership and maybe the other problems that will start to arise as we start to see more industry wide adoption of a trailer as a service model, what are some of those future looking problems that you could say, hey, this is what we're looking to tackle here?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we're looking to tackle from an enablement perspective from the 3PL is I came from an asset world, and so I understand how asset management works and the infrastructure needed to manage assets, to maintain assets. So from a 3PL perspective, wanting to maintain an asset light or a zero asset component, the problem that we're really trying to solve is how do we create less friction from you? How do we keep those assets off your balance sheet? How do we go to a trailering company where you're on a pay-per-use model? So you're only paying for the trailer for the one load that you use it for, as opposed to being signed up for a year or 5-year lease per trailer. And so we're really bringing it down to the load level, to the lane level pricing perspective, which opens a lot of optionality up for 3PLs to be able to participate in drop trailer business, be able to operate a fleet of trailers without having any balance sheet impacts, without having to build infrastructure around maintenance and shops and all those types of uh, highly costly additions to operating a trailing fleet. And then also in addition to that, how are we partnering with from a shipper perspective to give them much, much more visibility? Well, in order for us to do that, we have to start scaling.
Right.
And so I think that that's like the big thing when you start to see the adoption of and the big logos that we're closing in terms of scale, there's this element of I think in the current market that we're in, if you're a broker operating drop trailer business with third party capacity, oftentimes those are going to be the first carriers that ask for rate increases or tell you that they're placing their equipment elsewhere. Now may be the time to replace that drop trailer capacity with an agnostic offering. If you're a shipper and you want to be able to have a greater ease of use in terms of yard management in a tightening market where you might have larger carriers not have the available trailer capacity, having a dedicated backup trailer that can go anywhere. Those types of conversations that we're having seem to be resonating because there is a market capitulation that will happen. And when it does, being an agnostic provider of capacity, I think positions us very well.
Well, it sounds like you guys are in a good place and exciting to see the growth as this acquisition is like 3 months old and continuing to grow. So, Brett, thank you for joining us today for part of our Freight Fraud Symposium. We're going to take a quick break, about 5 minutes. So get up, stretch your legs, grab a drink. We'll be back here in just about 5.